Have you ever seen an air pump that looks as cool as this? Granted, nobody buys an air pump just on the way it looks, do they? Anyone? That's only partly true, but it did catch my eye enough for me to research this a little bit more and look into this air pump. The HP-806 looks fantastic, doesn't it? A 2-pin air pump, which is 4 watts, draws 4 watts of power, and supplies 6.9 litres per minute of air, or 415 litres per hour. It comes in 2 colours, with the orange detailing or grey, and is not as big as it looks online. It fits into your hand, wee bit of weight to it, but it's a nice little unit with a shark design. In fact, it's dubbed the Shark, the Black Shark, and it retails at a decent price. I think I paid £23 for this. So for that, you get the air pump itself, and then we'll see what else is in the box. So we've got instructions that you might expect, with some good advice actually if you're new to air pumps, but otherwise kind of redundant, and then a bag of goodies. Let's see what we got then. We've got a couple of lengths of air tubing. You don't always get these extras with air pumps, so it's a nice touch that they add this. But we've got a couple of decent enough looking air stones, a couple of adjustable air connectors so you can regulate their flow, and check valves, non-return valves, and a T valve as well. We've also got our airline clips so we can hold our tubing in place on the side of the aquarium. Basically, everything we're going to need to set our air pump up. So if we give it a wee look underneath, we've got these rubber feet that are moulded to a point to help reduce vibration. Then if we have a look at the box, it boasts ultra quiet suspended air pump structure and double shell. Now, I'm not too sure about the science of that. It sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? It sounds like they've put some ingenuity into making it as quiet as they can, and the reviews certainly did reflect that. The only way we know for sure is by testing it, but while I'm here, the rubber feet, if you notice, do leave a wee mark if you move it about. A minor point, but worth pointing out since I noticed it. So I'm wanting this to provide air to my Rio 450 and the two 30-litre Aqua One cubes that I've got underneath. So for one of the outlet, it's got to go to 2 tanks, and the other has got to go to the big tank. So this T-valve is going to come in handy right away. You can use the T-valve to get the 2 outlets to run into one if you've got a tank that you want to supply a lot of air to, or you can use it to split it between 2 lines. Wee tip, if you're ever struggling to get your air tubing onto attachments, you can either soak it in a wee spot of boiling water for a couple of seconds, or wave a hairdryer at it for a wee sec. Either of those will encourage the airline to expand a tiny bit, so you can slot it straight onto the attachments, and then when it cools, it'll be a snug fit. So once we've got this split into 2 lines, I'm then going to add our adjustable valves so that I can change the flow rate independently. Ideally, we'd have each length of air tube exactly identical. It helps to keep the pressure the same through each, depending how deep the water is in the tank, but that's not going to work for what I'm trying to do here. So being able to adjust each one individually is going to help me to dial it in where I want it. Next, we're going to add our check valves, our non-return valves. They are pretty much essential if you're using an air pump sitting below the level of the tank, right? Because water can flow back down the air tubes in very rare occasions, admittedly, but look at this. It looks like a piece of science apparatus, doesn't it? Anyway, if the pump is above the tank, obviously water can't flow back down the air tubes. Should your pump failed though, for whatever reason that may be, a power cut or something like that, which is extremely unlikely but possible, then water can flow back down the tubes. So we need our check valves to make sure that it doesn't get into the electrics and cause a problem. We note about the airline that comes with it, it is kind of thin and flimsy, so if it's going around corners, it could kink and inhibit the airflow. I'll show you a wee trick to avoid that in a wee minute, for bigger tanks anyway. Otherwise, you can get thicker airline that doesn't bend quite as easy. You can get these wee elbow joint connectors, and if you add a couple together with a short piece of air tube, you can actually make a wee bit that goes over the edge of the tank. Probably better for bigger tanks or tanks that have got a lid that will hide the wee connection, but that will prevent any kinks in the line where it's got to go over the edge of the tank. If you've got the space where it's not going to be noticed, this is where I like to add another wee check valve as well. The reason being, if the line is going to become detached at any point, I'd rather it happened here. The bit that goes down into the tank that's just going to fall into the water, and if you've got the check valve right where the surface of the water is, now no water can backflow from that point. I'm aware the advice is to add them nearer to the air pump, but if you're maybe messing around in there, around by your equipment, and it becomes detached before the check valve, then the water has the potential to run down and out at that stage. If you've got a check valve right up by the water line, like I have here, I don't think it's going to happen. See what I mean? If the water starts flowing back through the tube, that is the first point that it's going to stop, and you're going to get no spills all over your floor. If you've got a big tank like this big Rio 450, that's a lot of water and a big disaster. Anyway, after that, we can measure down in our aquarium how far we want the air stone to sit and add the air stone. The only thing to do now is add our suction cups so we can hold our airline in place on the side of the aquarium. And I've got to say, these suction cups are really good. So here's our pump sitting in the cabinet. Got a power button on the back with a wee operating light once it's on. And that's our airflow and adjuster dial. There's a good range between the high and low flow rates. This is it at the lowest settings, and as I move it up, as I turn the dial, there is a lot of air coming out of that air stone. Remember, that is only one of the outlets. The other one is running to the two tanks underneath, and there is just plenty, more than plenty in fact. If you're running a few air stones or a couple of sponge filters on a big tank, then this is going to be ideal. If you're running smaller tanks, I think it's going to be enough for, well, 5 or 6 smaller tanks. For a humble wee air pump at a very reasonable price, I'm really impressed. Here you can see the flow rate coming out of one of the 2 tanks running off of one of the outlets. Even if I turn it down to the lowest setting, it is more than enough. I'll revise what I said in fact. I think this wee air pump is capable of running 6 to 8 sponge filters for smaller tanks at least. Certainly enough for a couple of big sponge filters, well, 3 or 4 big sponge filters in a bigger tank. So the last question is it as quiet as it claims to be on the box and all the reviews say? I'm going to tell you, yeah. You get a fair bit of noise from the air bubbles themselves. Maybe with a better air stone, we can quiet them down a bit. But the pump itself makes very little noise. If you're really up close, you can hear a slight hum. But for a pump that's putting out that much air, honestly, once you shut the door on this thing, you can't hear anything at all. It's too big for one fish tank, but if you're running a few aquariums and you want to do it off of one air pump, I think I might have found the best one in the hobby so far.